so different. Good morning, good morning, good morning, my We Are Not So Different family. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. This morning's guest, we have Mr. Damon Davis. Good morning, Damon. How are you?
Good morning, Andrea. How you doing?
I'm great, fantastic, and terrific. Thank you for asking. Beautiful sunny day. Yeah. So it's gonna be a beautiful sunny day.
Yes, indeed.
So guys, let me give you a little bit of background about Damon. But before I do, you know the drill. Find your favorite spot on the couch, get your favorite drink, whether that's Kool-Aid or Cavassier, and tune into this conversation. So, Mr. Damon Davis. I keep wanting to say Damon Dash. Sorry.
I get that a lot. Sometimes when people just refer to me quickly, like, what's up, Dame Dash?
Yeah. Mr. Davis is the host of the Who Am I Really podcast, where adopted people share their stories of adoption and their attempt to find their birth families. He has interviewed nearly 200 adoptees from an array of life experiences, from awful adoptions and amazing reunions to inspiring adoptions and unfortunate reunions. In his autobiography, Who Am I Really? An Adoptee Memoir, Damon shares his journey to becoming an adoptive parent and his emotions over the birth of his son, Seth. He opens up about the heartbreak of grappling with his adoptive mother's mental illness while balancing the joy of locating his birth mother working nearby. His journey took a twist when he located his biological father via DNA testing. Woo, I got like 1,000,001 questions.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into this. I know it. It's a really fascinating story.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. I can't wait. So, all my guests get the same two questions, but then we can jump into the content. So number one, Damon, if you had the undivided attention of an audience of your choosing, who would that audience be and what would you tell them?
My audience would be adoptive parents, birth parents, and policymakers who are influential over the adoption space.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because as an adopted person, something that the lay public doesn't necessarily understand is the adopted child very infrequently, almost never, has any kind of say in where they go. The adopted child is given a destination by adults who are looking out sometimes for their own best interests. They purport to try to look out for the child's best interest, but it is often lost on them what the child's best interest is. And that is every intent and resource focused on keeping the child with their kin. And I use the word kin specifically because it doesn't have to be with their birth parent.
Right.
But with their birth family is incredibly important. And we can get into some of the reasons why at another time. But as an adopted person, I can tell you that I was very much loved growing up in adoption. However, it still struck a nerve for me to know that while my parents, and I call my adopted parents my parents, while my parents were extremely loving, very, very kind, generous beyond belief, and we got along famously, it still struck a nerve for me to know that there was another set of parents out in the world that I actually was physically, biologically, and on the family tree related to. And it's an undeniable curiosity. And so this is the reason why I would have that set of audience members together, because they are folks whom I believe need to listen very clearly to the voices of adoptees to understand better how the adoption process can be altered and how adoptees can be better understood in terms of what we've lived through, what we feel. I think there's a lot to be said to each one of those audience members.
I love that. I love specifically how you included those who have the authority to bring reformation and or change, policymakers.
That's right.
Because yeah, like it's great to have the parents and the birth parents and adoptive parents, but without the ones who actually have the capacity to make change, it's like we're just talking, right? So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that.
Thank you.
And number two, if you had the opportunity to speak to a younger version of yourself, let's say like 5 or 6 year old Damon, what do you think he would need to hear?
I would tell that guy, your mom is right. You can do anything you set your mind to. And
Yeah.
that was a repeated refrain that my mother gave me growing up. It was a means of encouragement. And she was absolutely correct that if I set my mind to something and focus on it, I can get it done. It's the lack of focus, the self-doubt, the self-talk that tends to be negative that can hold me or anyone back. But my mom would always tell me that one thing: you can do anything you set your mind to. And a couple of examples have been things like I joined the Obama administration in 2009 at Department of Health and Human Services. And here I am, someone who's never worked in government before, never been appointed by a president before, but set my mind to doing the task at hand, and I did it. I left the Obama administration and I started the Who Am I Really podcast. I'd never podcasted before. I'd never really interviewed anybody in any formal way, but I set my mind to figuring out what the technicality of setting up the platform was, what the challenges would be in finding an audience as well as guests. And I've built, a podcast that I think is fairly well respected among the adoptee community because I bring honest stories that I let the adoptees tell for themselves. Similarly, I do some real estate investing, something I had never done before. I set my mind to the fact that I wanted to create some alternate sources of income. I wanted to create generational wealth to break some cycles that have been part of my family. And I set my mind to it and I'm getting it done. So I think that if I was to reach back to this little 5 or 6 year old Damon Davis, I would tell him, your mom's right. So just listen, set your mind to what it is you want to do, focus on it, and you can get it done.
I love that. Come through with the receipts, Damon. You better let him
Mm-hmm.
know. So here's my thing though. So the way you say that makes me think that maybe little Damon was a little rambunctious and wasn't always like Mom, you know what you're talking about.
Possibly. But what child is, you know what I'm saying? Like what
Right.
child, their mother says something and they're like, okay, Mom, you're absolutely right. When have you ever heard a child say that?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
But the children need encouragement from other adults. Often the message is better received from another adult who is not the parent. I've raised 3 kids, and it's sometimes that you have to send your message to your children through surrogates, teachers, aunts and uncles, nannies and sitters, other people, and have them say, listen, this is what I'm trying to get through. And when that message is conveyed through that other channel, it's often better received because it doesn't come with the weight and the lens of having been delivered by your parents.
It's true. That's why you have, I want to say aunts, uncles, and even cousins, because there are a lot of things that I would share with an uncle or aunt that I would be like horrified to take to my parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
We don't have to put labels on the people. You can just call it the village.
Yeah.
It's literally the village of people that are supporting that child's better, well-being and growth, that are all conduits for the message.
Yes. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into this book, Who Am I Really? An Adoptive Memoir, that tells all about your life journey. I didn't even realize until just now, and I thought I did, because I usually stalk in a good way, not like a Joe Goldberg way, but like a good way. I usually stalk my guests. I didn't know that you were an adoptive parent, so I know that you had the son, Seth. So the others, you said you've raised 3 children. Are those that your adoptive children?
Yes. So I have 2 adoptees. They're all my kids,
Yeah.
but 2 adopted kids, 1 biological child. My oldest daughter, Carissa, my middle son, Sam, and my youngest is Seth.
Awesome. Okay, so when does this book come into play? Tell us all about the book.
Yeah, well, what I did with the book again is called Who Am I Really? An Adoptee Memoir. And I tried to capture the entirety of my journey, but not just from the perspective of Damon, the adoptee. I wanted to bring what I'll loosely call all of the players into the storyline. And I wanted to backtrack and sort of everybody together, bring everybody in a chronological order of how we got to the point where Damon was adopted, because there was a story that preceded my adoption. It's not just about my adoption itself. The adults had a trajectory they were on that led them to the point where somebody got pregnant. Somebody decided they wanted to adopt a child. That child came available, and here I am in the family that I'm in. So the book is really me taking some time to go back, describe very briefly who my adoptive mother was before I met her, who my adoptive father was before I met her, and how they met each other, who my biological mother was now that I know these facts post reunion, and who my biological father was after I met him when I figured out who he was. So I take a moment in the book, a couple of moments in the book, to introduce each of the adults in my life prior to my adoption. And then I introduced my adoption story. And then a lot of what I talk about is, sort of how I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, sort of well adjusted in adoption. I'll tell you, I was raised in a Black family. My mother is light skinned Black. My father was a dark skinned Black man, and I'm in the middle between the two of them. So we kind of looked like we could be a homogenous family. And we were open about talking about adoption. So, and I didn't have a whole lot of questions about it. So it wasn't really a taboo topic. So we were cool as family.
Okay.
I went ahead and talked in the book about sort of growing up in Columbia, Maryland, and growing up in what was predominantly a white community, and making the decision to go to a historically Black college. I went to Hampton University. And I go on to talk a little bit about sort of my own professional growth, and, eventually landing this job in the Obama administration, all of which are factors in my adoption journey. Because what ended up happening was, when my son was born, I spent some time at home with him. I call it lucky to be laid off at the time when he was born, because that allowed me to be home with him alone. My wife said, listen, I got this. I'm going to work. You can stay home with him until we figure out your next step. And she was amazingly supportive. And just one day at home with him, I was sort of sitting over him. He was on the ottoman in front of me, and he's like laying on his back, and his hands are flailing in the air, and his feet are kicking.
Yeah.
And I looked down, and I started crying. I was like, yo, this is the first biological relative I have ever known. And we made this dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was this moment of realization as to who I had been in the world, who I was connected to, and who I wasn't connected to, that I wanted to know. And that was a very heavy moment for me, to realize that there was an entire biological tree out there that I am a leaf of, but that I am not currently attached to. And that I have basically, to continue the metaphor, sort of created my next branch on the tree with my son being born. So it was just a really, really fascinating journey. I ended up deciding after his birth and that moment of realization that I wanted to search for my biological mother. And that's exactly what I did through Baltimore City Social Services. I was born in Baltimore. So the book continues with my story of trying to find my biological mother, and some of the challenges of understanding that my adoptive mother was suffering mental illness, and, some of the challenges of trying to find my biological father. And we can go into that, but let me pause for a moment and see what questions you have for me.
No, I'm loving the story. I want to hear more about, like, I can imagine there being a struggle. I don't want to say of loyalty. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. If my mom, my adoptive mom, who's my mom for all intents and purposes, how she would feel about me trying to find my biological mom. But
Yeah.
it sounds like your mom must have been cool. She was this loving, great person. So I don't know, I guess, how did you feel about how she felt about it, if I can ask that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And no question is off limits.
Okay, great.
This is how we get people to understand the situation in its fullest form, is to ask the hard questions and get those answers. So I'll be honest with you, I was not super concerned about how my adopted mother felt, because she had always told me, if you want to search for your biological mother, I will help you.
Okay.
And so going into this search, I was perfectly fine doing it. It didn't occur to me to feel a loyalty issue. Now, when I was younger, I will admit that I had a slight curiosity, but super, super slight. But it wasn't even so much that I would think about it on a regular basis, because I was so comfortable in my family. What they call it in the adoptee community is in the fog. And what it means is you can't see through with true clarity what adoption means, that a child was taken from one family and placed in another family that they are not related to. And so adoptees will call this being in the fog, because you haven't sort of gotten the clarity of what your adoption means in terms of trying to find your biological family members, in terms of what it means about perhaps the incongruence of how you get along with your adoptive family. Some people will tell you that they are athletes in a family full of bookworms, or they are gregarious in a family full of quiet people,
Yeah.
or, you can name all kinds of juxtapositions of personality, and the adopted person might tell you, yeah, that was me. I was this and they were that. And it can be little things like they were tall and I was short.
Yeah.
They were blonde and I was a brunette, whatever the characteristics are. So I felt perfectly comfortable in my family in the ways that I said previously. So it just wasn't a stark reminder that I was adopted to look in the family photos, or to see incongruence with the way that our personalities jived with each other. As a matter of fact, interestingly, we're all Libras. So my biological mother's birthday is October 8th. Mine is the 14th, and my dad's was the 17th. So
Wow.
we were all right there together. Like, it just,
Yeah.
if you wrote the story, it just you couldn't write it any better. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I didn't feel loyalty challenges in terms of reaching out to her, but I have had other adoptees tell me on the podcast that they did have struggles with that they
Yeah.
were really, they felt loyalty to their adoptive mother, that they felt pressure from other family members not to search, right? Brothers and sisters in the family. If sometimes what happens is an adopted person is brought into the family, and then for whatever reason, their mother and her body, I will loosely call it, relax, and she's able to conceive after post-adoption. I've heard repetitive stories of an adopted person coming into the family, and then once there's the maternal instinct maybe kicks in or whatever, the body or something is allowed to produce a child or conceive a child, and they end up with biological siblings. And sometimes those biological siblings are not supportive of the adoptee's journey to try to find their own biological family members. And they'll say, listen, you're really hurting mom with this, right? You're hurting dad. Or the parents will say that about each other. The father will say, you're going to hurt mom, or the moms will say things like, why are you doing this? Or am I ever going to talk to you again if you find her, right? So there's a lot of pressure around the desire to search that often forces adopted people into secrecy when they decide they want to search. Sometimes it's forced secrecy. Sometimes it's just because the search comes in the spur of the moment. So you can imagine, Andrea, if I was sitting in my room and just sort of staring off into space, and I thought, I wonder who my biological mother was. I know her name was Anne. Let me look for Anne's. And it might just be that quick that I would go on my phone and start looking for women named Anne in Baltimore, Maryland in 1972. And it wouldn't be this open, hey, mom, I think I'm about to search for my biological mother. That was when the search happened, right in that moment of introspection and curiosity. When I picked up my phone and started to Google a thing, that's the initiation of the search.
Sure.
And it can be really challenging for people to take a step back and include their adopted family into that search, because it has already started organically. So there's a lot to the search. It's a really fascinating journey for a variety of people, because there have been folks that have searched before I did who had to do old school gumshoe detective work. And then there's people who have searched after me who have the ability to find people easily with commercially available DNA tests, Facebook groups, and search angels, and just Facebook and social media itself, where people are very open about their, open in their lives, and you can find people very quickly. So the search can take on a lot of forms.
So how long was it a long process before you were able to locate your biological mom?
I was lucky, actually. It was not. It was surprisingly short. I contacted Baltimore City Social Services, and my wonderful social worker, Lee, brought me in for an interview. She called me on the phone, gave me a little interview, asked me why I wanted to search. And I was like, listen, I'm just curious. I'm fine. I got a job. I'm perfectly healthy, but there's a woman out there that I'm related to, and I would really like to know who that woman is. And when she realized, that I was in a good space, then I was just trying to satisfy curiosity. She went to Maryland's, paper archive somewhere, pulled out a biological, my birth certificate, uh, pulled out my file in terms of the adoption. So when a woman comes in to place a child for adoption, they basically sort of write almost a profile of the situation and document, notes. Who is this person and why is this child being placed? She pulled that out and she summarized it for me, because she wasn't able to she wasn't able to openly identify who my birth mother was, but she could give me generalities about who she is at that time, and how the situation or circumstances around my adoption. And then she said, listen, sign this form and write a letter to her. If there's anything bad in your adoption, you can leave that out for now. There will be plenty of time to talk about anything challenging.
Yeah.
Right now, you just need to introduce yourself, describe who you are, let her know a couple of things about why you're searching. And if we're able to find her, that letter will go to her. So I went to work one day and I sat one afternoon and I wrote this letter the entire afternoon. I didn't do any work whatsoever. I was working for the federal government, and unfortunately, I think I owe the taxpayers a couple of dollars because they paid me work I wasn't doing. But I went and I sat and I poured my heart out into this letter. I printed it out and then I hand wrote it so that I could make sure that she had, a piece of me, my own handwriting in her hand. And I dropped it in the mail and I smacked my hands quite literally. And I said, that's it. I didn't obsess over this before this moment. And I'm not going to turn over every night thinking about it now.
Good.
Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
And I will try my best to accept whatever does happen. And probably within a week and a half, 2 weeks, Lee called me and, I looked at my phone. I saw her number. I said, there's no reason for her to be calling me unless she's got something to say. And sure enough, she said, I found her. I've read her your letter and she's ecstatic. And I was just so relieved to know that she was also interested in knowing me. Because that's one of the things adopted people are challenged by is
Yeah.
I am coming back to these people who had some situation that we often presume is very adverse, adverse situation. And we often think, was she raped? Was she a drug addict? Was I abused? Like, what was the reason that I was placed for adoption? And we can go through a myriad worst case scenarios in our head, not the least of which is, what if she doesn't want to know me?
Right.
And that can be incredibly challenging for adopted people to try to reconcile. And I can tell you a story later of another guy who had the opposite of what I'm about to describe in my own story happen to him.
Wow.
But the idea that she was interested in knowing me and hearing from me and was ecstatic to get my letter was really, really heartwarming. And it just got better from there. Lee, my social worker, ended up asking my birth mother, Ann, to write me a letter. And Ann introduced herself. She told me, here I am hearing this letter. Lee read it to me over the phone. And Lee's voice was very sort of soft and sweet when she read it. And it was a surrogate for my mother's own voice, if you know what I mean. And she's telling me her name. She's telling me that she also went to Hampton University. She's telling me that she, had lived in Maryland near to where I had lived. I grew up in Columbia and she lived in Laurel, Maryland, which is just down the road. There were all of these interesting coincidences, even in that letter alone, not the least of which was on the day Lee was reading me Ann's letter, the very next day was Ann's birthday. So Lee is reading me the letter and it says, my birthday is September 27th, 19, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, you're telling me her birthday's tomorrow? And Lee said, yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. You're right. So Lee hangs up the phone. We're getting off the phone. She tells me, that's the end of the letter. And what she's going to do is she's going to pass my phone number to Ann. And she gave me Ann's phone number in that same moment. And so I texted Ann right after we hung up the phone. And I said, 36 years. That's how long it had been since she and I had seen each other when I was born. And I knew she would know exactly what that meant, given what letter she had just written recently that Lee had read. And I knew that it would be meaningful for her. And she called me that night and we had a wonderful conversation. It was amazing. We just kept on talking. We had an instant rapport and things were just absolutely wonderful. So I was really, really lucky and fortunate to be able to chat with her at that time. It was incredible.
I love that. So we met Mom. I do remember you saying something about meeting Dad, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah,
we wrote the book. How much later, or did the podcast come first? The podcast came after the book.
It's really funny. I'm glad you asked that because I got to meet Ann. She worked right around the corner from me at HHS where I was working for Obama. So I was able to walk over to meet her for coffees and lunches and all kinds of stuff all the time. So our story unfolded in an amazing way. And everybody that I told said, you should write a book. You should write a book. So I started to write. And then I left the administration at the very end. I stayed for the entire time. Pardon me. And I was at home and had some time to write the book. And I started writing the book and I started the podcast because every adoptee that I would talk to had a different reaction to my story. I would say, I would tell them the details of my story and they were like, oh, that's so wonderful. Me too. Or they would say, that's so wonderful, but that'll never happen to me because, and they would say things like, in the state where I was born, adoption records are completely closed and I have no access to them. So I don't feel like I'll ever be able to identify my biological family. Right. They would say things like, I reached out to my biological family. I found them and they don't want to know me. And it hurts really badly. And they would say things like, I'm scared to search. I feel like I want to, but I don't know what I'm going to find. So I haven't done it yet. And I don't know if I'll use the words whole enough to go on this search at this moment. People sometimes feel like they should be in a better financial place. They don't know if they're mentally strong enough to go on the journey, whatever the issue is. And so I started to realize after telling my own story quite a bit that every adoption story is different. I had in my mind the positive narrative, which is also part of being in the fog. The idea that all adoptions are awesome and they turn out great with amazing reunions. And it's just not the case. And so as I got awakened to that reality, I started to meet other adoptees who would tell me these alternate stories that were not as positive as mine. I realized, wow, there's a real misunderstanding of the adoption universe. And I want to help the other adopted people tell their stories. And that was the genesis for the podcast. So to answer your question more directly, it was have my child, meet my mom, start writing the book and begin the podcast at the same time.
Hey.
And the finding my birth father came way later. And in an ironic twist, it ended up helping me to close the book because I didn't know how I was going to close it really. And finding him actually just added the final chapter in a way that I could never have scripted. It was incredible.
Wow. So without giving away the book, because I want to encourage people to go get the book, but can we know if was it a positive, like, yay, reunion? like I don't want to give away the ending, but like,
it's all good. It's a wonderful story. And the truth is, my book is a very easy read. Like, it's the kind of thing you could blast through in a weekend. But it's full of pieces of my heart, pieces of my journey, and the stories of my parents. So I don't feel like you're stealing any thunder by asking these questions, because quite honestly, like, the book is worth the read. And I'm not just saying that as me. I've had people tell me that. And it's funny. Quick story. I was on a plane one day and I had my book in my bag, and I sat down next to a woman that I didn't know. And she just kind of said, oh man, I finished my book and I don't have anything to read. And I was like, well, if you're interested. And we were flying across the country from LA to DC, and she finished the book in that time. And she was like, and halfway through, I kind of peeked over to see where she was. And halfway through, she kind of looks up and she was like, wow, this is a real page turner. And I was like, yes. It was really funny. Yeah. But at any rate, the book is what ended up happening in my story was my biological mother told me when we had that first phone conversation that she was an open book and I could ask her any question that I wanted to. And naturally, my first question was, who's my biological father? And she told me who the gentleman was. And I sensed the pain in her voice as to what was really going on there. And I said, look, this reunion has been so wonderful. And I'm going to go back to the reunion because I've left out something amazing that really deserves to be said. But, I said, this reunion has been so wonderful. There's nowhere to go but down from here. Like, she told me this guy knew that I had been conceived, but was not supportive. Like, he pledged his support, but didn't act. You watch what people do, not what they say. And he said he was going to be supportive, but he did not act on it. And so I said, listen, if he wasn't involved then, like, he doesn't get to be involved now, but eventually, unfortunately, my biological mother, Ann, passed away. And I realized in her passing that I couldn't hurt her with my decision to seek out this guy. And so I did so. And unfortunately, like I said, it had nowhere to go but down. We didn't have a rapport. I didn't find him to be very nice. He was very self-centered and just kind of, it just wasn't at all what I was looking for. And to cut to the end, basically one day he sends me a note and he says, Mr. Davis, I'm not the guy. And I was like, how could you possibly know that, one? And number two, like, I'm a pretty dope guy. Like, you should want to know me. You know what I mean? I was really sort of hurt by that. But what ended up happening was I let it go. I said, you know what? Forget it. I guess I'm never going to know my biological father. And in an odd twist, my sister-in-law realized that my mother-in-law is adopted. And I also realized that she said when realizing that her mother was adopted, we should do DNA tests. Let's try to figure out more about mom. And we did DNA tests, and it was there that my biology being online got linked to my actual biological father. So the man that Ann had named as my biological father was not the guy.
Oh my gosh.
He was a different person. And fortunately, after I was able to connect with him, sent him a letter to describe how I had reached him in the first place, he was receptive to talking with me. And coincidentally, I was taking a trip to his part of the country, and he agreed to meet me. And we had a wonderful first meeting. My son, Seth, my wife, Michelle, and I flew from Los Angeles to Las Vegas for the day. and we sat down with him, and he coincidentally was a genealogist. My birth mother, Anne, was a genealogist. So both of them, when I first met them, ended up sharing some really deep information about our personal history. It was really fascinating.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So all this and more, babies, look, can be found in the book. Do me a favor, tell my listeners where they can find you.
Absolutely. So again, I'm Damon Davis. I run the Who Am I Really podcast. Who Am I Really can be found on all of your podcast platforms. You can check me out on Instagram at Damon L. Davis. You can also check out Who Am I Really at WAI Really, WAI Really. And you can also find the stories on Facebook, facebook.com/WAI Really, and the webpage, whoamireallypodcast.com.
Yes, those podcasts sound like they are juicy. So please find your way over there. I know I am, simply out of curiosity for what I have going on myself. Damon, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It has been excellent. And I pray that you keep keep being able to do what you love, because it's inspiring, truly.
I appreciate that so much. And same to you. You know, having a podcast called We Are Not So Different is inspirational in and of itself, because that is absolutely a fact. So I want to encourage you to keep going on your journey. This is an amazing platform for people to share pieces of themselves so that we can see we are not so different. And I love that you're there for this.
Thank you.
We are not so different.